Awesome. So thanks so much for doing this. This is gonna be loads of fun. It's been almost a year since I saw you guys at the Colorado Vintage Motorcycle Show. So let's start with in the last 10 months. Have you picked up anything good?
Yeah. I picked up a CB750, and it had 3,800 miles, and I bought it from a Cars for Kids auto donation center. And it was just an awesome find. But the reason why everyone passed on it is because it looked horrible. The guy left 3/4 of a tank of gas in it for over 40 years.
What you talking about?
And so the tank was rusted from the top and the bottom. So all that brown gas just leaked everywhere. And a lot of people thought it was rust on the pipes. And when I first looked at it, I thought, there's no way I'm buying this bike. But then the gauges looked brand new. It had 3,800 miles, 3,800 miles. The price was right, under 2,000. And all it needed was a tank. So I cleaned the living crap out of that bike, and it looks great. And I put a 1975 Yamiya tank set on it because I love the Planet Blue. So my bike is a 74. Planet Blue came out in 75, but it's my bike, and I just want Planet Blue, so I went with that.
Well, and it was for a good cause.
Right.
So it's for all those people that say you can't find these motorcycles, you can find them in the most unassuming and unpredictable places.
Yes.
Yes.
So I bought a BMW R90S, and all my friends were mad. They said, "How did you find that?" And I said, "It was on Craigslist." And they said, "We look on Craigslist all the time." And I said, "Well, this one was under collectibles." So when I saw it, there was like a teacup for sale, then the R90S, and then like an antique sewing machine after that. So why the guy put it under collectibles is beyond me.
Well, probably so he just had to do one listing, right?
Yeah.
So and that goes to,
and he didn't have to pay for it.
Right. That goes to show it's such a good example. I found one on I found a CB750 on it's proxy bid, and they do auction sites all over the country, and somebody had misspelled Honda. It was a Honda CB750. It was HNDA. I don't know how it showed up. I think I was just searching motorcycles, and nobody bid on it. And I got it really cheap, right? It's just because they misspelt it. And it's pretty crazy. You never know where you're going to find this stuff, right? It's under collectibles. Yeah. And the seller, in their defense, when you're trying to, who knows, they may have been clearing out an estate or whatever it was. And I've got all this stuff I've got to list, and I'm just going to throw that in there. It's going to be one listing. Somebody will know somebody who knows somebody, right? And that's what they do. And unfortunately, fortunately for people that are savvy enough to look around, it's some sellers don't do the best at trying to sell their stuff. To get the most eyeballs on it, they just make a listing. They don't go back and edit the listing. They don't even take really good photographs. So if you can look through it, it's even better. I'll give you an example. When I bought my CB450 K1, when I bought it at auction, it was on an auction site, and they sell Mach 4 motors. They do an auction every year, and they sell a bunch of stuff. The bike had been spray bombed black, so the chrome side covers were spray painted, had these silly high bars on it, and it just looked awful. And nobody could tell what it was because it just said CB450. It didn't say that it was a K1. Unless you looked at it closer, you couldn't see it. And I bought the thing for $400.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I first looked at SCB750, I said to myself, nope. But then I looked at the mileage, and then I looked at the pipes, and I really got down on the ground and looked at the pipes, and they were solid. And I said, well, they have to be solid because it's got 3,800 miles, and Colorado is not a humid state, really. It's a pretty dry state. And everything looked good on it.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's so awesome. It's so great when you can find something like, especially a CB750 with original pipes that are intact, let alone they're rust free or not, but just intact is hard to come by. And for the price that you paid, you did really good.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, and I wanted a CB750, but I didn't want a restored one, and they're hard to find. And I've been waiting like, I don't know, 9 or 10 years to find one, and this is the one I want to keep. So it stays in the permanent collection.
as permanent as that collection stays, right? As
yeah. I get bored easily, and then I see some new shiny thing, and I'm like, well, how can I get that? Oh, I better sell this or something,
That's kind of what happens, right? You get, I know I just went through and moved 6 motorcycles, and just because there are other people that wanted them more than what I did at the moment. And I am a firm believer that there's another one that in some of these things, you have to look. The Tracy body 750 I have it may be harder to find another one, but I'm sure there's probably another one out there. But that one's on the short list to stick around, right? It's, although if somebody shows up and they want it way more than I do, it may end up at somebody else's house. But especially for what I have in it, I mean, I'm playing with house money on that one. But how did you get into these old motorcycles? What brought you to them?
So when I was a kid, my cousin rode up on a Honda Super Hawk, the CB77. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to own one of those one day because they're just so cool looking.
Yeah.
And then in 1975, I could buy a motorcycle and I could ride it during the day only on a learner's permit when you're 15 and a half. So I found a Super Hawk, and all my friends told me it was old and stupid. So I ended up buying a CB400F. My uncle and I went and bought one together. He went with me to make sure I didn't get ripped off.
Yeah.
So anyway, that bike was awesome, and I rode it for years, and I always wanted a Super Hawk. So when I was 49, I bought the worst Super Hawk I could find, and I ended up buying like NOS parts. So I call it my new old stock Super Hawk because damn near every part on that bike was NOS. And Ed Moore out of Kerrville, Texas, rebuilt the engine for me.
Yeah, that's crazy. So when you think of these, it is, how do I put this? It is these emotional decisions that drive us to these emotional connections that drive us to making bad financial decisions, right? It's like this CB77, only because you had one. It was your first motorcycle, if you will, and you finally get a chance at a point in your life that you get to relive that time. So whether your friends were right or wrong with it being an old motorcycle, moving to a CB400F was a pretty good step up. Not as emotional of a connection, but it's an amazing motorcycle, and that drives us to making those decisions that are great. And it's one of those that we were having this conversation the other day about restoring, and one of the things that I always keep in mind, if you're going to restore a motorcycle, the first thing you do is not learn how to fix motorcycles, is figure out a budget. based on
Right.
your level of restoration, what restoration means to you, right? And
Right.
like your CB750, you restored that motorcycle, meaning now it's running, riding, you can do what you want to with it, and all you had to do is replace the tank. You didn't have to tear it all apart, powder coat the frame, and then do everything back again, right? So once you decide what that level of what restoration means to you, then you got to figure out your budget. But that all that goes out the window when there's an emotional connection. It's something you want to rebuild from your past or whatever it was, right? The motorcycle my wife and I went on the first date on, whatever, whatever those things are that we do. That's when I can say, okay, well, screw the budget, screw how long it takes, just get this, because what's that worth? Unfortunately, people start to do the latter, nuts and bolts restoration, before they even figure out if they like the motorcycle.
Right. I'm guilty of that. Yeah, I rode it and I'm like, oh my God, I hate this bike. Because between the seat and the pegs, there weren't enough inches. And I rode the bike when I was younger and I loved it, but I'm not as flexible as I used to be, and my hip was killing me.
Right.
And I'm like, God, I can't believe I got to sell this motorcycle. So I ended up selling it and not making any money, but I made space in the garage for something I wanted. Right.
That's it. The space is a premium. That's the way I look at it. It's, if I can move it to somebody else that's going to appreciate it, and I get space back, that again opens me up to other opportunities. I don't know if you're this way.
Yeah.
I tend to find more motorcycles when I'm not looking for them.
Yeah. So I put on the Colorado Vintage Motorcycle Show, me and Paul Krause, every year. And anyway, some people just come up to me and they go, Bob, I got some old bikes. Can you help me sell them? And I'm like, sure. So then I invite myself over. I go through their garage, and if it's something I don't want, I list it. Or if I got a buddy that's into those bikes, tell him about it. So yeah, I've helped a lot of people through the show every year.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So when if you had to think about it, before we get into what's in your garage, what's on the bucket list of motorcycles? Do you have a list, one that, the Holy Grail would be for you?
I would love a Vincent, but honestly, they cost us about as much as my first house did, like 50 or 60K. And I just can't see spending that much. But a realistic bucket list would be, I love the old Honda Nighthawk, the CB700S. And I've been looking for one for years, but most of them have 20 to 30,000 miles on them.
Right.
So I kind of worry about the not finding one that's been sitting in a garage for a few years. Yeah. So I'm just going to keep my eyes and ears open for one of those.
What year was that? That was middle 80s?
Yeah, so that was 84, 85, and 86. And they, for 2 years, they came red with a red decal or a blue decal. And they were painted black with the blue or red decal. Yeah. And then in 86, they were red and black or red, white, and blue. And the base coat was blue, and then the stickers were red and white, I believe. And they were 700s because that's the year of the embargoes where Harley Davidson got a break to help them out. Well, so anything over 750.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, every bike over 750 cc's got a special tax. So all the Japanese manufacturers made 700s, and then they made sure those 700s were faster than any previous 750 ever built.
My bucket list is, yeah, you can easily go to the most expensive motorcycles, especially if you look at the ones that are trading at Mecum. I go for an H2 or something like that, but they don't really do that much for me. So I've got a kind of eclectic mix of motorcycles. One of them is and it's kind of a fluid thing. I've set my sights where I change it every. I've got a list of motorcycles, about 5 motorcycles that I want to have, but then every year I add to it kind of motorcycles I'd like to get that year. Meaning I don't want to keep them, I just want to experience them so I can mark them off the list. And this year, one of the motorcycles is an old Goldwing from the 80s that when they became the big cruisers, like an Interstate or an Aspencade, something like that. I just want one of those and road trip it. Just want to road trip it, and then I'll be done with it. Just own it for a short period of time, and that would be it, because that's what they were made for. So it's a weird, it's your grandfather's touring motorcycle, and it has all the bells and whistles on it. It's just, but I appreciate those motorcycles. What was it? The Kawasaki Voyager, I believe, and I appreciate those because they were very purpose built. In the 70s, motorcycles were kind of Swiss Army knives. They had them do anything. They were starting to kind of, with the SL350 and the CL. The CL, you really can't call it a dual sport. It wasn't until the SL350 came out that, okay, that was purpose built to be off-road. Well, in the early 80s with these, they were purpose built to drive across country. They were not to be confused with riding them to the grocery store or anything like that. They were designed to get on the highway and just go. And I appreciate that. It's like the GPZ in the early 80s, my GPZ 1100 was purpose built to go fast, right? It was, they were doing it just for one reason only. And I can appreciate those sort of things. Are they the coolest or most interesting motorcycles? No, but to me they are, and I like the grandma colors that they put on them. They had them champagne and that light blue. Yeah, why not? That's on my short list this year. I'll own one of those this year. Ideally, if I can find one running that is away, then I just road trip it here and I sell it when I get here. That would be ideal.
Yeah.
But that's the short list on mine. Another one that has been on my bucket list for a while. It's I don't know why, and I think I know why, but it's not much of a motorcycle. It's a Sears Allstate Vespa. I don't know if you remember when Sears and only for one reason only. It's a Vespa. It's just like a Vespa, but I love that. Way back in the 60s, that Sears had so much leverage that they could tell manufacturers what they wanted to do. And yeah, we'll sell your motorcycle. They did that to Pook with the Allstate Twingle. They did it with Vespa to say, hey, we'll sell yours, but you have to call it what we want you to call it.
Exactly.
And there's something about that is pretty, it's, I don't know, but there's something about that just says, okay, and I thought their logo was really good. The outline of the US with just Allstate in it. I like their badging. And that's it. That was one of them that's on the list, and you can find those and they're out there, and I'm still casually looking for the right one to show up, but that's it. I don't want a Vespa. It could be the same model. It just has to be an Allstate for whatever reason, but that just seems interesting to me because Sears had so much leverage back then. They were the Amazon of its day, just didn't have the foresight in the 90s to see the way through it.
Right.
Because
that's all Amazon is a big, huge Sears catalog, and you can buy anything.
Buy anything. They figured it out. And I did some research on this for work, or a presentation at work, because I thought it was interesting at how companies that are too big to fail tend to not have the foresight, and they get disrupted by a company by a bookstore. Amazon was an online bookseller. We forget that in 1995, I read the minutes from the Sears board of directors meeting. Sears said that in the meeting, they said that people want to experience the product, so they went all in on malls. People want to
Yes.
go in it. 1996, Amazon opened
Yes.
and put them out of business. I mean, shut them down. Sears had so much stroke that they owned everything, right? They owned brands,
Yeah.
they created brands, they'd been around forever, except they just didn't have the foresight to be able to make this happen, which I thought was pretty crazy. But Amazon could do that same thing today. They have enough stroke that they could go to a manufacturer and say, "We'll sell it, but I just need you to rebadge it."
Exactly.
You know, and
Yeah.
they just didn't have the foresight to be able to do it. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. So I think because of that, I'm really pulled to the Allstate for whatever reason. But they're just interesting, fun little bikes. They're just motorcycles. And plus, I had a guy that lived when we lived in Connecticut. A guy that lived at the end of our street. We lived on an old farm road in Connecticut, and he lived at the head of the road. And he had a 1964 Allstate Vespa, maybe a 150, whatever it was. He would ride it till the temperature dipped below 30 degrees, and then he'd park it till the next year. And he rode it every single day. He rode it to breakfast. He was retired. He rode it to breakfast every single day. The guy just put miles in on this thing, and it's awesome. That's the great thing about these old motorcycles. For whatever reason, he had his forever, and for whatever reason, they get in us, right, and we can't get them out of us, right? Like this guy he just couldn't stay away from it. Just had to do it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So what do you have one that got away that you wish you had back?
Yeah, so I'll go back to my 1985 Nighthawk. Like an idiot, I sold it, and then the guy I sold it to put about 30,000 miles on it, and he goes, "Hey Bob, do you want your bike back?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then he sent me pictures, and it looked like it went through hell. You know, and I'm like, dude, it's got 30,000 miles. I think those engines are good for maybe 40, and it looks like hell. So I think I'll pass. But yeah, I wish I'd have never let that go. And,
yeah,
and that's about the only one.
Yeah, I think in thinking about that, I think I only have one that I wish I had back. It was a motorcycle I paid $50 for delivered. It was 1978 Yamaha XS650 that I turned into a little cafe racer. I got it again, $50 delivered. The story is that I met this guy. He actually does movie props and he does cars and motorcycles. And we met at a bike event. And he goes, "Hey, I think I got a motorcycle you'd be into." No problem. I gave him my number. I said, "Just give me a call. We live in the same town, so it would be no problem." I said, "Give me a call or send me pictures." Didn't hear from him for like 3 months. And then he calls me up and he goes, "Hey, Eric, I know I was supposed to send you pictures, but I didn't. But that motorcycle's on a trailer. I need to use the trailer. Can I bring it over?" I'm like, "I don't know if I want it." He goes, "I need to use the trailer." So he showed up here, and I probably could have got it for free because he needed to use the trailer. But I wasn't that into it, and it was pretty rough looking. We thought the engine was seized. Come to find out, the previous owner had just tightened we didn't think the engine was seized, thought the rear hub was seized. But come to find out, the previous owner had just tightened the rear brake down because it had fallen over at one point. And so because he didn't want anybody moving it. And so once we figured that out, that was it. But the only reason why I want it back, I would want that motorcycle back. We turned it into a little cafe racer. It's the one that my wife and I sewed. That was the first seat we ever made, was on that motorcycle. We sewed it, and she sewed it. And we put that thing together, and then I traded it for my pickup truck. Right. So I traded it for my yellow and white Ford F-150. But that's not the reason why. The reason is I was having trouble tuning it. And I was talking to my son one day, and I said, I need to find a motorcycle Yoda. I need to find some old guy that knows everything about everything. I said, I thought I'd found a couple of guys in the town I lived with, but I ended up being their Yoda. right? So I
Yeah.
needed somebody else. And so the very next day I posted in a local forum, old motorcycle forum, on Facebook, on a group. I posted in there that I was having this problem. This guy responded, said, I got to wrecked one of those in my yard. If you want it, you can have it. And then his phone number. I called him. We became fast friends, and he became just one of my best friends. This guy knew everything about everything. And he recently passed away a year or so ago. But it was just one of those, that connection, because you got to be careful what you ask for. The day before, I told my son I wanted to find a motorcycle Yoda. The next day I found him. And I called his nickname to me was Yoda. I called him Yoda. I referred to him as that because it was less than 24 hours from the conversation.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
having that motorcycle back would be fun. If it ever pop up available for sale, I'd find it, because that would be just that story gets complete and it would stick around. Although I have built another one for my son-in-law that looked almost identical to it. We put the
Right.
75 tank and 10s on it for that XS 650, which I think are the best graphics. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. But that's the only one I wish if I could get it back, that would be the only one. There was another one that I sold only for the reason my dream, our 64 Dream, Honda Dream. A really good friend of mine that we used to trade motorcycles back and forth, and he was sick, and he lived in Arkansas, and every time we talk on the phone, he goes, "Hey, did you find me a Dream yet?" And I said, "No," and then after a while, I talked to him one more time, and he goes, "Hey, did you find me a Dream yet?" I said, "No," but I said, "Look, I'll do you one better." I said, "I'll sell you mine, but you have to sell it back to me for what I sold it to you for when you're ready to get rid of it." So no problem. We had a deal. And sure enough, I sold it to him and I dropped it off to him. A year later, he called me up. He said, "Hey, you can come pick it up." So that was
Sometimes you got to be careful what you wish for. You always want a bike, and then when you get it, you kind of hate it, and you think, "Oh well, okay, I scratched that itch, and now it's gone."
that. Ironically, you say that is when I put when I got the Tracy body last year at Barber, I loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it. It's beautiful. I cleaned it up, polished it up. It was great. Finish is in great condition. I put it on the bike, and at first, the first impression is I was underwhelmed. I guess I expected more from it. I was like, "Oh, the tank's too small. I wish they would have made the tank a little bit bigger." Right. And looking at it, doing all this stuff in my head, it's beautiful. And I know people that see it are saying, "Hold on, you're a crazy person for thinking about it." But I built it up in my head and built it up on the bench the way that it's going to be this magical experience when I drop it on, right? The angels are going to start singing, all that's going to happen. And I was underwhelmed at first just because I thought the tank was a little too small. I wish it would have been a little bit, so it'd be a little curvier. If it was a little curvier, it'd be perfect. But the more I look at it, the more it's like perfect, because for what they did back in this thing is handmade, completely handmade, right? They had a guy that laid the fiberglass. They made 3 pieces of this body to put it together. The fender section gets glued into with fiberglass. The tank gets this thing completely handmade. And for it to still be, and it's a piece of fragile fiberglass that's been around for 50 years, and it's still intact, and its original finish, then the more I look at it, the more it's like, yeah, this thing is perfect. Everything about it. But at first glance, when I dropped it on, I thought it would be this, it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen the Mona Lisa, right? You go into the Louvre, the big room that it's in, and then it's like a 8x10. It's not, we had this blown up to be this magical experience, and you look across and you're like, "Oh, it's not that big." And I thought it would be bigger, right? It's kind of thing. And so that was kind of the same kind of, although it's beautiful when you look at it, the first impression was, kind of threw me off. That was one of the kind of a weird moment that I didn't expect with that bike. But I rode it for the first time with the body on it last week. It's perfect. They did
Yeah,
such a good job.
yeah,
You know.
yeah, yeah. My first Tracy body kit, some guy had one on a BSA, and I think Tracy did the paint job on it because in two different places it had the Tracy logo under the paint. So yeah, it was just it just screamed 1970s, which is what I love. The paint job just nailed the 1970s, right? And then I started learning that they did them for BSA, Triumph, Honda 750, the Kawasaki 900. And now a lot of manufacturers make their body kits like that, where they seem like they're all one part and they all flow together. So they were ahead of their time for sure.
So when I got the body, I did a deep dive on Tracy Fiberglass Works. I mean, I went a beautiful mind, right? There was string yarn, there was yarn and pictures all over the wall. It went kind of crazy. And I emailed with back and forth with a guy that worked for Tracy Fiberglass Works back then. And it was interesting here. And he even sent me photographs of early bodies that they used for the 750F as a prototype for the 750F, what eventually became what Honda eventually did. But when you look at it was so interesting talking to him. But when you look at the early 80s, and the reason why that fiberglass lasted for a short period of time is this ABS plastic came out with these molds that I've got the Kawasaki GPZ sitting right next to it, and the plastic on the GPZ is why the Tracy Fiberglass Works went out of business, because Kawasaki could make thousands of these in a week, where how many could Tracy make? Because it probably took 5 people to do the one that I had in a week, if not longer,
right,
to do one, right? And so, yeah, you see that efficiency kind of put them out of business, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. But I did a deep dive on this Tracy Fiberglass Works. There is one that I want to find. I can't remember what it's called. I think it may be called the Interceptor. But this thing it's an all-in-one unit. The handlebars are inside. It looks like the something that would have been in like Batman TV show or something like this. All in one tank, handlebars and everything. The handlebars are inset in the fairing, and it is insane. They've got such crazy stuff. I mean, I found, so speaking of the paint, I found the order list. So I found a catalog online, a PDF of it, and you could order the kit, the body, and for $79 more, they would paint it.
Oh,
any way you want it.
That's a bargain.
$79. It was like, would you spend $149 or $249? Can't remember the number, and then $79 more, and we'll put this crazy paint job on it for you.
Yeah, it was a great paint job. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and this guy's BSA lasted. I don't know if he found a new old stock body set that was painted or what, but it just looked awesome.
Yeah. So I got lucky when I found mine, and it's so funny because I've been to Barber Vintage Fest for years, and we camp out in the swap meet, so we see everything that's at the swap meet. And I'd never seen one there. I'd only seen one other one in person. And ironically, it's only like 5 miles away, sitting in a barn, and the guy is going to do something with it one day, right? It's been in the same spot in the dirt, and one day he's going to do something with it. And but this past year at Barber, there were 2 of them, and it was the other one sold for, it was listed for sale, and so for $750. It sold, don't know what it sold for. It sold and then ended up at another vendor spot for sale again. Because that tends to be what happens, right? They move. I buy it from here. It's a location. I buy it from over here, then I sell it over here. And I know I do that. I buy motorcycles, get them running, sell it from our spot. And this one would just happen to be, the guy apparently didn't really want to sell it. He had another body kit on a 750, but not a Tracy. It was a one I'd never heard of. And he had it on the ground next to his camper, and you couldn't even see it. And I happened to spot it on the ground, and it had been there for, I saw it on Thursday, and I figured the price would come down, and I bought it Sunday afternoon. He had been sitting there. He had, had never wanted, I think when I first saw it, he wanted $500 for it. When I saw it again, he wanted $600 for it. And then when I went back on Sunday, I got it for $300.
There you go. Yeah.
So you can't beat that. I'll take that.
And they're not well known. Yeah, the Tracy bodies are not that well known.
Yeah.
I only know about them because I put on that vintage show every year.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what they were.
Right.
You know. God, there's a motorcycle out of Sweden, I think, and I forget the name of it. But anyway, they're kind of cool. They're a 504, and you can see the valves working.
Oh, wow.
And God, they made them almost exactly the same way from like 1920s all the way up to the 50s. Nimbus. Yeah. Yeah. NIB. NIMBUS. Yeah.
Yeah. NIMBUS.
So yep. I wanted one for the longest time, but then I thought, God, what am I going to do with this thing? I can't work on them. I can't get parts. What the hell, you know?
You know, these old motorcycles is, if you're willing to kind of do the research, which is one of the things I like most about getting motorcycles I don't know anything about, is trying to find out more about them and seeing what's out there. And then you end up down this rabbit hole of, I never knew existed, a whole part of the world of people that you never knew existed. And it's interesting. It's interesting to be able to see it, to be able to go down that rabbit hole. I've been going down this Laverda American Eagle rabbit hole with that 750 that I have that we're putting back together. There's not a lot of information on the American Eagles. There's little to no information. Let me rephrase that. Little to no information on the American Eagles out there. But there is substantial information on the Laverdas. You know, although there weren't a whole lot of them imported into the U.S., but that's been an interesting thing, puzzle to put together.
A side note about the American Eagle Laverdas, Evel Knievel jumped that bike for 2 years.
Yeah.
He had two of them, and American Eagle gave them both and signed I guess a 2-year contract with them. And then Harley stepped in and said, hey, you're jumping the XR 750 until you're, you know, and
yeah.
They had that long-term relationship after that. So you asked me what I had in my garage, and I got a 1974 Laverda SF2.
Yeah.
And that SF2 is just like the bike you're putting together. It's a 750 twin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
and we talked about the XS650. I bought a 1980 XS650. It was a special too, so it had the mag wheels front and back, and I turned that into a tracker. And I didn't like the looks of it because the front wheel was 1 inch or 2 bigger than the rear wheel. And then they made a kit to put the front wheel on the back wheel. It was a spacer where you could bolt it right in, and then you can take that spacer and bolt your rear sprocket on. And it aligns perfectly because they did the engineering for it. And so anyway, it looks great right now. It sits right, and it's just it turned out awesome. Now my ass can only handle that seat for about 75 miles, and then I want off of it. You know, because it's got that classic seat that's only about 1 inch thick. Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing you bring up. So motorcycles you build and then you hate, or you put together and you hate. There was one that I traded with a friend of mine, and it was an old bobber build. It was built back in the probably early 90s. And he had taken, he's a really good friend of mine. He had taken an XS 650 and shortened the frame a bit, made it a hardtail, and it looked really good. And we put it back into service, and we put a seat on it, had to do some things to it to bring it back to life, because it had been sitting outside of his shop in the back cupboard, but outside for years. And so put the thing back in service and wrote it, and realized that this thing is awful. You know, it was bad news. The geometry of it, because it was shortened, was just weird, right? I felt like I was too bunched up, and I had put lower bars on it to kind of stretch out a little bit, just to make it fit a little bit better. But it was not good. Nothing about it was.
Yeah.
And I was happy to get rid of that one. We ended up selling that one, ironically. So I had very little money in it.
But that tracker attracts so much attention. I love showing it off. I could have a Vincent next to that tracker, and I think everyone would gravitate to the tracker.
Yeah.
You know. I got a 1980 CBX. I always wanted a CBX. I enjoyed that. I got that 1965 Super Hawk. It's black. I love that bike. I restored a black bomber years ago, and it wasn't any faster than my Super Hawk, and I didn't like it, so I sold it. But I always liked the look of that bike. Yeah. And then a black bomber fell in my lap, and I bought it, and I restored it. I took it apart, got everything painted, got everything. Some parts zinc plated, some parts cadmium plated, and a few chrome parts, but not many on that bike. And I bought the original mufflers from a reproduction company, and the header pipes were good, and I reused those, because those are hard to find on a black bomber. But then I didn't want to put the original motor back in. And I know I'm devaluing the bike, but I just didn't want to put that motor in there. So I ended up finding a CB500T. So my bike is a 66. The CB500T was a 75. So it was almost 10 years apart. So I think I got a much better motor, because the original 450 KO, the black bomber, had a 4-speed transmission. This one has a 5-speed. And the 500T is stroked, where it has gobs more torque, where you actually need the torque. So I love riding that bike now. So I just love that bike. It's so much fun.
How hard was it to get it to fit?
It was easy. Almost everyone asked me that. So you have two things to overcome. One, the engine is narrow where you mount it, but I just had two spacers machined, and then I was able to bolt the engine in, no problem, because everything else lined up perfectly, amazingly enough. Yeah. And then where you plug in the electrics to the stator, they upgraded the stator, so it has a different male-female connector. So my bike needed a new wiring harness, and there was a guy out of Taiwan redoing them. So I told him, hey, I need a KO, but that stator has to be the same connector as the 500T. And he doesn't speak English. I don't speak Chinese, I guess, over there. Yeah. So anyway, somehow Google Translate helped hooked us up, and I got it, and it wired in perfectly. And it was like, oh my God, that was so easy. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, because the reason why I asked is we have it's a friend of mine's, a CB, it's a black bomber, but the engine is
Yeah,
locked up, and we cleaned it out, and it's going to take a while to unseize if we ever get it, and if the engine once we got to get it, we have to get it unstuck so we can take it apart so we can rebuild it. So, but I was thinking that we could either just put a later CBCL engine in it, 450 engine
that's
in
what
it.
I would do. Yeah,
Yeah, that you can get them way more affordable. The parts are way more affordable, especially if you get one from the early 70s. Parts are way more affordable, and it won't be correct. Got the engine that over time he can do that, and he could get this bomber back on the road affordably, and then spend some time and money on the engine as it kind of so you're not in a hurry, so we don't break stuff along the way. And because what we're going to find out once we free it up, we may find out the transmission's no good, right? It's going to have to be taken apart. It's going to have to be completely taken apart and completely rebuilt. So, and we know what those parts are going to cost. So you can put this thing
right.
back in service, and the layperson, especially if it was a 450 engine, the layperson's not going to know it. And you end up with a 5-speed transmission. Yeah, your purist will go, hey, it's the wrong engine, but it's your motorcycle. You can do what you want to with it, and just as long as you can put it on the road. That's what I think, and that's what he wants to do. So that I think is going to be that would be my first suggestion, to say, hey, let's do this, and you can do that affordably and not have to worry about it.
I agree. That's exactly what I would do. That's exactly what I would do. Yeah, I meant there's just too many good motors out there to, unless you're doing a concourse restoration and you want the motor that originally came in the bike, I get it. But my bike is a rider, but it looks damn good. Right. There's a couple things I want to upgrade, like the chrome fork seal holders. They're probably about 5 or 6 inches long, and mine are pitted really bad. And if I could find a new set, I would probably rebuild the front forks again and put that back in. That's the only thing about that bike I don't like. Oh, and the lower fork legs could use a fresh coat of paint too.
Yeah. That's when we talked earlier about kind of restoring motorcycles, I like, especially if it's a motorcycle I'm going to keep, if it's going to be mine, I like to do rolling restoration. Get them running, make them look as good as I can with as least amount of money as possible, and do it over time. Every time I pull it out to ride it, I see, because you don't know until you start riding it, right? That's what bothers me, or this is, I don't like the controls there, or whatever, and then replace that as you're doing it, because majority of those are all things you can do in an afternoon, right? Rebuilding the fork seals. You can take that down once you find those other ones, but there's no reason to pull it apart until you find those pieces in good shape. And then your bike is always in service, right? You can always use it, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to send it off and it's going to be gone for 10 years. And then who knows when, because once, and I don't know, I tend to buy motorcycles like this. Once they have the best intentions and they blow it apart, and then life gets in the way and it never goes back together.
Yeah, my black bomber sat down in the basement for, 7, 8 years. And then I got really serious about finding a motor, and a CB500 with, again, it's a 500T, so it's the twin, not the CB500 with the 4-cylinder. Right. But yeah, that bike just fell into my lap. It popped up on Craigslist as a parts bike, and it had 6,000 miles. And somebody just wanted it off their property.
So yeah,
I love that you traded your XS650 for that Ford pickup. It was a good-looking pickup. I think you put a motor in it, if I recall from your YouTube channel. And what a great deal. I mean, you basically got a great truck with a fresh engine, and that thing should last you a good long time.
I tell people it's the last truck I'm ever going to buy.
There
You
you
know,
go.
it's we put basically everything underneath. It's brand new. We put a new engine, new transmission, uh, all new suspension, all new bushings, everything up, new steering rack. Everything is new underneath, and gradually doing rust repair and making the body look prettier. But it was so funny. It's a 1978 Ford F-150. It's my daily driver. I drive it anywhere.
Right.
But people that don't know, they see it as an old truck. They don't realize that the engine now only has 18,000 miles on it. It's going to run forever. And so they see it as an old truck. And I tell them, like I drove it to St. Louis about 6 months ago, 5 months ago. And then, wow, you're driving it all the way over there. I said, yeah, if I bought this truck in 1978, I would have drove it anywhere in the world. Right? It's the same thing. It doesn't drive past many gas stations, but it still gets me where I want to go, and I have it completely set up to haul motorcycles around. So it's perfect.
Exactly.
You know, it's great. I love it.
Yeah,
Dude, this was awesome.
Yes.
Just who would have thought, right? Right? Just talking motorcycles for an hour plus can be loads of fun. But you guys have the Colorado Vintage Motorcycle Show coming up soon.
Yeah, June 8th. It's in Erie, Colorado, for all the folks listening in Colorado. Erie is just east of Boulder, and it's really close to the Denver metro area. And Erie is a small town, so they can walk and have breakfast. They can walk and have lunch. They can, you know, it's just a great venue.
Yeah, it's a great little town.
I think we're going to end up. Yeah. I forgot you were there last summer. Yeah.
I was foolish enough to ride a 40-year-old motorcycle over there.
Yeah.
Some people make horrible decisions, right? But it was awesome. It was I would do it again. Yeah. If I did it again, I would just go Texas and then come up south. I would skip Kansas entirely.
There you go.
So, but yeah, it was awesome. It's a beautiful venue. You know, it's amazing location. You got the mountains in the background. It's definitely a place. It's a show worth going to just because and I know I got there towards the tail end because weather was pulling in and I was late last time, but the folks that I met were just so nice, right? It's just this wide open, fun kind of show, people just showing up and it was awesome. So yeah, if you're definitely in the area or not in the area and you're crazy enough to ride a motorcycle from, you know, Louisiana to Colorado, go ahead and do it.
Exactly.
More power to you. Dude, this was awesome. I appreciate it. And look forward to many more of these. You know, I always tell people that the motorcycles are cool, but the stories are way cooler. And the more of you know, we've met once before, we've talked once before, other than this, apart from when we met at the show last year. But you don't have to know each other to have a conversation for an hour. And it's kind of, that's what I love about this, because it kind of brings people together, that no matter what you do, as long as you find people with like interest, you can talk about them like you can talk to them like you've known them forever.
I read a great quote, but it was about classic cars, but it applies to motorcycles. If you love motorcycles and I love motorcycles, we're basically two friends that haven't met yet.